بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظون من أمر الله إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم وإذا أراد الله بقوم سوءا فلا مرد له وما لهم من دونه من وال. صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم: يا أيها الناس أفشوا السلام واطعموا الطعام وصلوا الأرحام وصلوا بالليل والناس نيام تدخلوا الجنة بالسلام أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد. If there was anyone in this world who faced more difficulties than the Prophet ﷺ, then Rasulullah ﷺ would not be in the position that we know that he is, which is to say, Habibullah. When we talk about the Prophet ﷺ, we are talking about a man who fulfilled what he said himself, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests those whom he loves the most. There's no debate about this. There's no conversation, oh, well, maybe this person suffered more or this or that. The reality is that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, at a young age, he lost his father. Actually, prior to his birth, lost his father, and at a young age, lost his mother. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was raised not by parents, but first by his grandfather after his mother's passing, then his uncle. And worst is, the hardest part of this is that even at a young age, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, living with his uncle, realized that he had to bear more responsibility than typical children would. When he had to go out and work as a shepherd, when he had to go out and help earn, because his uncle Abu Talib was not wealthy and he was not able to support the family on his own. The Prophet ﷺ was an orphan. He was someone who worked from an early age, and he was someone who, in spite of every single challenge before prophethood, kept a countenance, kept a mannerism that was kind and generous and soft. You know, the reality is that very often when we face difficulties, they begin to harden our hearts. You go through something tough, and all of a sudden you start to think to yourself, why am I doing these things for other people? Why should I be kind to people when no one's being kind to me? Why should I be righteous and good and easygoing with people when nobody does the same for me or my people? You begin to feel a sense of this anger towards the world because people aren't doing right by you. But what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam realized is that this world does not promise us anything. There is nothing for us in this dunya that is written or promised except that which Allah has written. That's it. And it may well be bad. It may well be difficult. We may find ourselves in circumstances where we're crying and just begging Allah to make things easier. And this even was the case for prophets alayhimus salam, that they were so shaken by what was going on. Mata Nasrullah was their call. Inshallah, the help of Allah is coming. When is it coming? We don't know. We'll see. Ala inna nasrullahi qareeb. Allah's help is close. See, this idea is what I wanted to reflect on today. Because the reality is that the world we're living in, it feels like everyone is just on us. Everyone is attacking us. Everyone wants to make us the bad guys. And the reality is it's not that dissimilar from the world we lived in 20 odd years ago. That was a time when things were far more exciting, if you will. Things were very, very touch and go. There was a lot happening. And in those times, the response was very often trying to just apologize, or to try and just say, no, 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 this isn't it. Rather than looking at the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. Because if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was 6 years old, lost his mother, lost his father before his birth, lost his grandfather before 10, was raised by an uncle who made him have to work because he couldn't support him. If the Prophet ﷺ could go through all of that and come out the other side as a man who the companion said we never saw him except that he had a smile on his face, that tells us everything we need to know about how we live as believers in difficult times. And know that this wasn't something that happened after he became a prophet. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was known to be Sadiq al-Amin before prophet. And ask yourself, if I was tested with so much hardship and so much difficulty, would I allow it to change me into a person who always felt like I deserved whatever I wanted? Like the world owed me something? Would I act like that? Or instead, would I act how the Prophet ﷺ, that I was someone who was always helping people in need, always there for people to feed them, always there to host guests, to join family relations when people were fighting? He didn't say, no, no, what's wrong? I don't have a family, so why would I help their family? The Prophet ﷺ would go and help people, aid them. Before prophethood, the Prophet ﷺ was so well respected. This young man who had lost so much, who had dealt with so much hardship, he was so well respected that when the time came to rebuild the Kaaba, and the tribes were trying to figure out how do we decide who gets to put the black stone in, they said the first person that walks through the haram, the next person to walk through the haram, that's going to be the person who judges for us. And when the Prophet ﷺ walked through, when Rasulullah ﷺ walked through, they rejoiced. They were so happy. They said, oh, this is the best possible person we could have asked to judge this. And he gave them a beautiful judgment. He said, all of you take a sheet, take a corner, a side of the sheet, lift it up, bring it, and I'll put it in myself. What a beautiful way of solving such a complex problem. It seems like the obvious solution, but no one except the Prophet ﷺ thought of it. Now, I want you to think about this again. Those who allow these hardships to harden them, to let their hearts become harsh. When the opportunities come that people say, can you help us? What would they say? They say, no, I'm too busy. I have my own things to take care of. Get somebody else. Or instead, none of you are good enough. I'll just do it myself. This is a mindset that seeps into our hearts when we allow hardship to change us. When we allow these difficulties to alter who we are. But we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a messenger who had been through so much and told us, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ, that you have a messenger from your own selves, whether human beings or Arabs. You have a messenger, and he is so worried about you. Harisun alaykum. He's so concerned with what's going on. He's aggrieved by your difficulties. Anytime you're going through something, he's always concerned about it. And then he finishes, بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. With believers, he is soft and kind, merciful. Can you ask yourself, how often do you see people, when dealing with difficulties and hardships, how often do you see them respond with a smile? It's very rare. We do see it. We do see it, but it's rare. We're seeing it right now with our brothers and sisters in Palestine. That in spite of the tragedies that they're facing and the hardships, every single time people ask them, are you okay? They say, Alhamdulillah. All praises to Allah. It's okay. And this is the sunnah. that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after he became a messenger, after he was given prophethood, after Jibreel alayhi salam came to him, he was preaching to his people in Mecca for 13 years. And what ends up happening is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is constantly persecuted. And for someone who is so soft at heart, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you might kill yourself, harm yourself because of the fact that these people won't accept your message. This is how soft his heart was. To see the very same people that he was trying to save not only ignore him, but worse, persecute him. And then forgetting himself for a moment, persecute his followers. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he walked by and he saw the family of Yasir radiyallahu anhu, Sumayya radiyallahu anhu, Ammar radiyallahu anhu, he saw them being persecuted, and worse, not just persecuted but tortured by Abu Jahl. What could the Prophet ﷺ? All he could say to them was Sabran ya ahla Yasir. Have patience. Jannah is waiting. And for Sumayya radiallahu anha, the first martyr of this deen, and Yasir radiallahu anhu, the second, Bidnillahi ta'ala, it is. And it was. But what did the Prophet ﷺ do? Did he go out and fight Abu Jahl in that moment? Did he go and start acting a certain way? Did he start becoming very angry and upset, loud? The Prophet ﷺ said, Sabran ya ahla Yasir. Peace, patience, have patience, ahla Yasir. Too often this idea of patience gets conflated with apathy. That if I am being patient, that I'm being apathetic. I'm not doing anything. But there's a very, very stark difference between the two. To be apathetic means that you do not care. To be a person who thinks that I just have no concern over this, it doesn't bother me, I'm here to just do my Jumu'ah and leave and that's it. I don't really care what happens to people 4,000 or 5,000 miles away from me. It doesn't matter. That's apathy. Patience, Sabr, is what we see from our brothers and sisters in Palestine. That they are ready for Shahada. They are ready to give their lives. This is what we see. In spite of the overwhelming odds, they stand patient. They say that we are here and we will not leave because this is our home. And we trust Allah. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. We trust in Allah and He is the best of ones to put our affairs with. Scoot up, brothers. Please fill in every gap. There's a lot of people still to come. There is a difference between apathy and patience. For us, brothers and sisters, we need to realize that patience is going to mean two things. Number one, that we make dua to Allah for our brothers and our sisters. That we beg Him, not just put up our hands, say, Rabbana atina fid dunya, that's it. No, that's not enough. And it's not right. In a time like now, this is the test of those who do not face such difficulties. Are you in such a state that you have this apathy in your heart that you can't spend 10 extra minutes raising your hand saying, Ya Allah, protect these children. Ya Allah, protect my brothers and my sisters. Ya Allah, forgive them. Grant them shahada. Are you so engrossed in this dunya that you cannot even give your brothers and sisters suffering far away that time? Because that's apathy. Sabr is, I sit there and I make that dua and I know that Allah is the one in control of it. That's the first part, is making that dua. The second part is taking the steps that I can take. Doing what it is that I'm able to do. Every single person here has a smartphone. Every single person here has an email account. Every single person here has a way to contact elected officials. And the reality is that it may not do much of anything. But at the very least, we are speaking up. And it's not me saying this. The Prophet ﷺ said himself, if you see something wrong, change it with your hand. And if you can't do that, use your tongue. That email, that message to these people, that is your tongue at work. And that is the bare minimum responsibility that we have. To speak up for our brothers and sisters. To say something. Not just post on social media because it's good. While you should do that to spread awareness, you have to also take these steps. The people above us, the people who are in charge, we see some of our ai our shuyukh, who are saying this is what you need to do. Even people who are in these positions in government are saying this is what you need to do. If you want this to be taken seriously, this is what you need to do. So that's what we have to do. That is sabr. Because I do it and I leave the rest to Allah. But I do my part. I do what I'm able to do. And then Allah will take care of the rest. I want you to reflect on the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, after those so many years, well over a decade of being persecuted, of seeing his followers persecuted, of hearing about the deaths of his companions because they were being tortured and harmed, that the Prophet ﷺ marched across the desert, not in a nice little air-conditioned car, not on a train, chilling, laying back. The Prophet ﷺ came across the desert on the longest path possible, going backwards first and then going forward in the blazing hot sun to arrive in the city of Medina, to tell the people with his first address a very simple message. Ayyuhan nas, O people, afshu salam, spread peace. That doesn't seem to add up, does it? Most of us, if we are persecuted, if we're harmed, if we're tortured, the first thing we'll say when we have the opportunity to speak is go and take care of those people. Especially now that we're in charge. What did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Afshu salam. Spread peace. Spread this greeting of salam. Spread this all around you to people. وَطْعِمُ الطَّعَامِ. Feed people. Not just feed the hungry. Not just feed those who are in need. Feed people. It's am. It's general. It doesn't say what kind of people. Feed people. There's a narration about a companion who famously, as he was sitting in a gathering where they were about to bring food in his home, and they started to give the food out, he said, first, take the portion of this animal that we've barbecued, that we've made up and cooked so well, and give it to our Jewish neighbor. And those others who were around him, they said, Ya Abdullah, what are you talking about? You want us to give it to him? He said, the Prophet ﷺ used to enjoin us to our neighbors so much that I thought that he would command us to leave inheritance to them. He used to command us to be good to our neighbors so much that I used to think that he would command us to leave inheritance to them. How many of us know our neighbors? How many of us can look around our street and say, that person is my neighbor, I know their name, I know their kids, I know their family? Or are we so apathetic that we could care less about spreading da'wah, about giving da'wah through the smallest of greetings, through the smallest of acts of giving food? That's apathy. The Prophet ﷺ did not teach this. And we need to understand that all of this comes back to one thing. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in spite of facing every possible difficulty, in spite of being tested so much that no human has ever been tested as much or will be tested again, in spite of that, he never changed who he was in his heart. He never allowed it to make him bitter. He never allowed it to make him an angry person. He remained who he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was. throughout it all. And that is our example to follow. You may see people and they're justifiably angry. But you have to understand that this anger changes you. It makes you bitter. And bitterness, brothers and sisters, is corrosive. It is not what our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after leaving At-Ta'if, having been stoned, having bled so much that our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his shoes were filled with his blood. Just for a moment, imagine, because if it's hard for you to imagine the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam facing such difficulty and feeling angry about it, imagine your own father. Imagine your mother walked somewhere and people pelted her with stones and she comes home and her legs are covered in her own blood. And she's covered in her own blood all over. She's crying. She's feeling it. How would you feel in that moment? And understand that the love we are to have for our Messenger is even greater than that. And if he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was put through that kind of difficulty, and then he sat down and his words were not, Ya Allah, destroy those people. Rather, when the angel came to him and said, I can destroy these people by crushing the mountains on them, what did he say instead? No, I rather have hope that from their progeny will be believers. This is who he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the face of the hardest time in his life, the most difficult moment he had ever faced, he didn't flinch. He stayed true to who he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is our example. This is what we look to. This is what we have to act. Whatever anyone else does, that's on them. But individually, we control our own selves. We need to control ourselves and move towards the example of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فأستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, there's not much more that I can say on this subject. The reality is that we know who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, and we know what he stood for, and we know what he did. And if we don't, that's the next responsibility we have leaving here, is that we need to know our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This pain that we feel for our brothers and sisters is not going to go away. And you may think to yourself, the best way is to just kind of forget about it and go back to my life, but that's not the right answer. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he used to reflect on this verse of Surah Al-Maryam, وَمَا كَانَ رَبُّكَ نَسِيًّا, and your Lord does not forget. And he used to cry, because he used to say, what does it mean for us? Your Lord does not forget. Allah does not forget what those who commit sins do. But worse than those who commit sins are those who oppress. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what the result waiting for those who oppress is. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Don't you dare for a moment think Allah does not know what the oppressors do. إِنَّمَا يُؤَخِّرُهُمْ لِيَوْمٍ تَشْخَصُ فِيهِ الْأَبْصَارُ. He only gives them respite. He only leaves them alone for a time that will come when their eyes will stare forward in horror for what they used to do. This is Allah's promise. But I leave you with a few things. Number one, know what it is that you have to do and focus on that. Control what you can control and don't worry about things that are out of your control. If you worry about things that you can't control, you're going to drive yourself nuts. Focus on what you can control and work to do those things that you have the ability to do. Leave the rest to Allah. Number two, make sure that you make it a point to sit and make dua for your brothers and sisters. This is not a suggestion. This is an obligation that we have to our brothers and our sisters. That if they are suffering, the least we can do sitting here not expecting a bomb to rain down on us is sit for a few minutes, even though we may be a little late to work, or we may not earn this or earn that, is sit for a few minutes and just make dua for them. Just make dua for them. And today after Asr is a time the dua is mustajab, it's accepted. Make dua in that time. And lastly, do not allow these circumstances, this difficult time that we're facing, don't allow it to change who you are. Continue to be like the Prophet ﷺ in smiling in people's faces. Continue to be like the Prophet ﷺ in being good to your neighbors. Continue to be like the Prophet ﷺ in always allowing yourself to move forward in the best way possible, not as an angry, bitter person. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for all of our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to goodness. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us firm on the message of Sunnah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتوب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروه يغفر لكم واتقوه يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا وأقيموا الصلاة.